broader geopolitical issues. Kasama dyan, of course, understanding of logistics, which is what real experts do rather than just talking big picture strategy. Kaya kasama natin ngayon si Admiral Romal Ong. Thank you very much. Professor of Praxis, Admiral Ong. Thank you very much for joining. Retired Admiral Ong. I-emphasize natin, baka mapahamak na naman tayo. Kamusta, Admiral?
Welcome back, Richard, from your European visit.
Of course, of course. Obviously, one of the previous times we were together was during the visit of Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski, and also that was also one of the bases that I discussed with them, possibly visiting Poland, meeting their different think tanks, discussing geopolitics, Russia, China. Parang ang sinasabi ng mga Polish, neighbors na tayo because between us is China and Russia. So we're separated by just one and two countries. And with North Korean troops showing up on the borders, or actually within the borders of Ukraine already, signs of China also more directly involved. Eto na, so it looks like the nexus and enmeshment of entwinement, of strategic consideration, Eastern Europe and Asia is coming together. Just as interestingly, I noticed dumpling pala yung food din nila sa Poland. I always thought that's an East Asian food. Yung pala meron din sila version, which tells you about how the Eurasian region is really connected. Now, Admiral, before we talk about, basically, papunta na tayo sa 10th year anniversary ng West Philippine Arbitral Award soon, no? We just finished, 9th Arbitral Tribunal Award anniversary, and I found it quite interesting na yung mga bansa na nag-express ng support, purong mga Western country, Japan, Korea, India. Basically, wala sa mga kapitbahay natin. But we can have a discussion about that, about whether the Philippines is on the right track and what's the good, what is the bad, and what is the potentially ugly. But before that, Admiral, hindi kita tatanungin about Atong Ang and all of this Tanim Buto, ay, tama ba yung ko? Buto. Sorry. Yeah, I just need to get that right. And then, may Ilocano din kasi way of saying it. And then, obviously, all of these concerns about online casino, among others. Obviously, medyo off siguro siya sa topic natin, Admiral. But, speaking of gambling, pogos, etc., should we still be concerned about influence operations or some sort of corrosive investments or capital from a sharp power point of view? Almost 1 year? Kasi last SONA, di ba, President BBM banned the pogos officially, and soon he's gonna have another SONA. So, kamusta naman ang kalagayan natin on that front, Admiral? Also, of course, considering what happened during elections.
Okay, hindi kasi part na study ko yung on criminal organizations, but there are other experts, Western experts, who look at yung relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese criminal groups. So meron silang collaborative relationship.
Symbiotic, yeah.
Yes. And maybe dito sa yung proliferation of pogos, nagkaroon ng yung ecosystem of the influence operations na umusbong dito sa Pilipinas sa partly United Front work activities by the party, partly would be yung in the form of pseudo-economic investments. And the third component will be yung input ng criminal organizations.
Right.
So I'm not saying na yun yung but may possibility na ganun yung nangyari dito. Yung nag-merge ang tatlong components at nag-manifest siya rito sa Pogo.
Isn't it concerning, Admiral, that up until today, medyo hindi pa rin tayo sigurado about the level of penetration by potential agents or on malign influence operations? May pagkakulang pa rin ba tayo in terms of awareness or understanding of the nature of the threat? Kasi medyo, ilang taon na natin pinag-usapan, pandemic days pa.
Well,
sorry.
I think in terms of awareness, nag-gain traction na in the public.
Yeah.
But more important, sa government, within government, nagkaroon na siya ng traction. They're doing something about it. Kaya lang, we're playing catch-up
Yeah.
Ito nangyari na they were able to operate freely before. And now, nagkaroon tayo ng awareness, then we're doing something about it. Problema, yung magnitude ng problema, we need to deconstruct kasi parang naging intertwined siya eh.
Yeah.
Right? Now, yung mga recent reported incidents of espionage activities, hindi nahuli naman sila eh. Kumbaga, nailabas sa general public na mayroong nga ganito activities. But marami pa yan. Okay? You have to understand yung yung foundation ng yung doctrine ng Chinese in terms of intelligence operations. It's not like yung Western type na targeted siya, very focused.
Yeah.
Yung kanila is more of dispersed and they leverage yung nila, yung Chinese population talaga, yung diaspora nila. Or yung Chinese nationals nila all over the place to actually conduct yung mini spying activities.
Right.
Kasi yung bits and pieces na yun, pag pinabubuo nila, then they get the big picture.
I want to get back to this again, Admiral, but before that, I want to ask also, nakita ko yung si Dindo dun sa event sa Arbitral Tribunal, he posted yung latest pulsation, which I also got on my email the other day. Pag titignan natin, Admiral, there seems to be still a regional element, right? Pagdating sa NCR, ang taas ng awareness, not only on the West Philippine Sea issue, also taas ng awareness in terms of the need to push back against, bullying in the West Philippine Sea and erosion of a rules-based order. But as you move towards the south of the country, the numbers don't hold, right? Parang may divergence. So I'm all for the argument about Imperial Manila and abandonment of all of that, but at the same time, parang syempre we need a certain degree of solidarity and uniformity in understanding our national interest in the West Philippine Sea. It's not like Mindanao is too far away from West Philippine Sea, right? What do you think about that regional heterogeneity, if I can put it that way, or disalignment on the West Philippine Sea issue? Isn't that potentially source of concern, or is there more disinformation in certain regions of the country, or receptiveness to disinformation? What's going on there?
Okay, that question was actually asked last Friday during yung Strategies Forum sa Manila Boat Club. We diverted this question back to Dindo, Dr. Kasumanli. Ang assessment niya is the disinformation is actually the one causing that spike in sa region na yan, sa Mindanao. Okay. So consistent tayo in the sense na yung kalaban natin is actually in terms of yung disinformation designed to create civil disorder or to divide the country. Okay. So yun yung isang manifestation na we need to address as well.
So disinformation, but obviously disinformation does not become as effective in without certain preconditions there, right? So yes. So what are the preconditions, Admiral?
Well, Mindanao yan, so there is a predisposition to actually affiliate themselves with the previous administration. So yun yung basis ng that makes them receptive to the disinformation.
And
so again, confluence both the fake news in terms of content as well as yung yung sense of political affiliation nila.
What about the aspect of the history of Western interventions there? Especially the U.S. aspect of this. I mean, my sense is obviously, again, it's a much more complex picture, gets ko yan, but obviously there's much more skepticism towards the West, diba? Given the U.S. military presence and operations in Mindanao throughout the years. How do you think that could have made more fertile ground to the Chinese narrative? So hindi lang disinformation per se, but this idea that hindi naman China yung sumusugod sa ibang bansa, hindi naman China yung nagko-colonize sa ibang bansa, hindi naman China yung nag-engage sa, I don't know, yung mga massacres na nangyari nung panahon ng mga Amerikano or other things that happened during the global war on terror. What about that aspect, Admiral? And if indeed that's a dimension, how to deal with that?
Okay, I don't have the hard data on the terms of survey for to support you to answer your question, but we can speculate. Posible yun, may effect yung global war on terror noong the early 2010s as a sort of disenfranchise yung population to the West. Possible yun. But I think there is also less traction on yung identifying with the Chinese dun sa region na yun.
Mm.
So the only possibility na magkaroon ng traction against yung ano natin sa West Philippine Sea is under false flag conditions, meaning it can be Chinese sponsored, Chinese driven or disinformation, but it is packaged in a different way na hindi siya pro-China.
Right. And what about the aspect, Admiral, of investments and all? Alam natin yung Mindanao Rail Project, among others, hindi natuloy. But sa pagkaalam ko, maraming mga sister cities project, no? Marami rin mga more small and medium scale infrastructure projects na baka may kinalaman ng China or to some degree funded by China. We know that the biggest Chinese project to this date na hindi pa rin kompleto is the bridge project in Davao. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, so that's pretty big ticket, at least in my books. And then, compare that to the fact na US, parang US aid na nga lang, yun pa yun, nawala pa yun, di ba? So, what about the soft power competition, hindi lang sharp power?
Well, possible yun, but hindi naman lantad yung soft power, yung soft power effort ng China rito sa Mindanao. Although there are possible use of yung United Front work activities, ang target nila are yung schools. That's possible.
Schools.
But again, mahirap ikabit yung actions na yun with an anti or not supportive of the West Philippine Sea. Hindi siya direct connection doon sa question if you're going to post it in the survey.
And Admiral, going back to this, okay, medyo mag-real talk tayo dito. So 9 years na since the Arbitral Tribunal Award came out, it's final and binding based on every, basically sane understanding of international law. And yet, 9 years in, we don't see only some sort of gap divergence, regional divergence on this issue. We don't also see persistence of etong mga basically disinformation networks when it comes to pushing the pro-China narrative, basically anti-Philippine narrative and anti-international law and UNCLOS narrative. But also this divergence in terms of like yung mga bansa na nag-express ng support sa atin is basically Japan, Korea, New Zealand, India. So hindi totoo na Western lang, but it's those countries and then basically mostly European countries, right? Plus United States and all of that. Halos wala akong nakitang Southeast Asian state, not even Vietnam, did I see them to make an explicit statement of support for the Arbitral Tribunal Award. I mean, yes, we can debate about back in the day, this and that, but I mean, if they really are supportive of us every year, they could also release a statement squarely saying the arbitration award was this and that. And also when it comes to ASEAN as a whole, I'm not sure that it was even discussed during the latest ASEAN foreign ministers meetings or summits in Malaysia. So, is that supposed to be a source of concern, Admiral, or is just the reality that maybe we're much more like-minded with Western democracies in Japan and Korea and New Zealand and Australia and India than most of our Southeast Asian countries who supposedly are much more amenable to Chinese influence, or at least they don't have the strategic culture of confronting China the way we do. I mean, what is your read in terms of that divide, Admiral?
Okay, pwede natin tingnan yan in two angles from the Chinese side and the Philippine side. On the Chinese side, I would say what we are seeing is yung efficacy or yung effectiveness ng kanilang geoeconomic strategy in Southeast Asia or in ASEAN. So, problema ganito the US is basically a military power. So,
right.
Ang approach niya to power dynamics is the leveraging yung hard power niya to gain influence.
Right.
Si China, it uses yung economic strength niya. At least before, nung medyo malakas pa economy niya. Okay?
Yeah.
Medyo ngayon kasi medyo problematic But in previous years, talagang very, very robust yung economy niya. So na-leverage niya yun in terms of reaching out to the different ASEAN capitals. Then samahan mo na nung tinatawag nating elite capture.
Right.
Okay? So you have this, you are saying, okay, Richard, I'm going to your country. These are my menu of investments that I'm going to funnel to your country.
Right.
But also ito under the table, friends tayo, meron din tayo dito. So it's yung yung combination of yung what I would call weaponized investments, tapos yung influence operations designed for elite capture. Combination nun, then we're dealing with ASEAN capitals na basically na-turn around ng China to its side. So tayo ngayon, parang we've used the word outlier before.
Right.
Yun talaga yung sitwasyon natin. Now on the Philippine side, given that ecosystem that we're working on, tingin ko may pagkukulang din tayo in terms of reaching out to the different ASEAN countries. We could have we could have sent a diplomatic mission to each of those countries. Tapos,
But would it work? But would it work? Yun nga eh. I mean,
without expecting that they will change their minds. Pero
Sure.
at least, on our part, nag-effort tayo to reach out, explain why we're doing what we're doing.
Right.
At least merong open channel. They may, gano'n pa,
Yeah.
pwede sila magreklamo, oh, you're doing it wrong, that's not the ASEAN way. So what? No? Pero at least,
nag-effort ka.
na-communicate natin yung sentiments natin tsaka yung position natin without necessarily them agreeing to what we're doing. But at least may effort tayo. So nandun yun. So baka ang isip ko, baka kinulang din doon.
Well, I mean, that's what is being said by critics, and I think Indonesia also not last year, diba? Nung lumabas ang news na we're gonna sign the yung reciprocal access agreement with Japan. I think Indonesia said something like they were not consulted or ASEAN was not consulted, which kind of raised eyebrows. Like, why should we consult you on matters that are bilateral with Japan? It's our sovereign prerogative. But I think Indonesia was trying to say something, right? Na parang mag-effort naman kayo ng konti to appease.
Maybe inform
Right.
would be the right word. We could have informed them without necessarily asking them whether they agree with us or not.
Right.
On that RAA. Kasi at the end of the day, we operate on what is our national
Interest, yeah. Exactly. So is that the way, like on every RA we're gonna sign, we're gonna just give them a heads up, like I don't know, brief all of their ambassadors here, parang ganun, di ba? I mean, siguro DFA secretary can gather all the ambassadors, brief them on this issue, and then at least ask for their understanding or say that this is our position. You're under no pressure to come out and support it, but I hope you also don't take this wrong. Parang ganun, di ba?
Ganun lang. We're going through the motions of actually informing them, not consulting.
Yeah, yun nga. At the same time, of course, this is a debate, right? Is it even worth constantly trying to mollify or at least, or even try to win over ASEAN? Because obviously, probably you and I are much closer in terms of our point of view on this. Pero marami rin tayong nakakausap ng mga kaibigan natin in the strategic committee who are saying ASEAN is not even worth it, or baka ASEAN will spy pa yung ibang countries, will pass it down to China. Di ba? Yung mga ganun, may trust issues eh. Parang sayang ang energy mo, may trust issues pa, and then parang damn if we do, damn if we don't. Like whatever we do, yung ibang ASEAN countries naman talagang ayaw nila ayaw nila confront ng China. So they'll always find an excuse to criticize us, or as I would put it, to even gaslight us, 'di ba? Parang kasalanan pa natin for standing up to China and calling out what China is doing. And this was my criticism of Lee Hsien-loong, the former Singaporean prime minister, who kind of implied parang tayo pa yung troublemaker, which is a kind of line I heard from other Singapore-based also experts, which was quite disappointing. Like, basically, if you're not useful to us, you can keep it to yourself, right? Like, you can keep those kinds of comments to yourself because you're not really helping at all. I don't know, like, nagigets ko rin kung nabubwisit na rin yung mga ibang kasama natin. But yeah, I agree with you. We have to try. But yun nga, like, we have to try and then...
Sa Richard, kahit sayang yung oras natin, kahit sayang yung energy,
Yeah.
we should not surrender the diplomatic field. Yung bang by just not by act of formation, not reaching out.
Yeah.
Kasi that opens the field to China eh. Kumbaga, we surrender the field without any effort. Dahil lang kasi naasar tayo o napipikon tayo.
Yeah.
But kasama yan sa kasama yan sa struggle eh.
Yeah. Battle of narratives. Yeah.
Oo.
Tama.
Kailangan pa rin mag-reach out. At the end of the day, kapitbahay natin yan. To some extent, kalahi natin yung mga yan.
Right.
And we have shared history. So, kahit sayang yung oras, try natin. At least on our side, ginawa natin yun. Ang akin naman, sa 10 kinausap mo sa isang bansa, siguro naman kahit isa yung makonvince mo na hindi naman kumampi, but at least pakinig sa posisyon natin. Okay na yun eh. Leveling of expectation na lang tayo.
Yun nga eh. Well, I mean, Vietnam was always the best candidate for that, though. But I'm trying, I mean, like looking at the domestic politics in Vietnam, the rise of securitycrats, these former KGB trained people, and also the fact that Vietnam is so dependent on Chinese intermediate goods, technological input, and FDI. Parang minsan, I'm wondering if even Vietnam maaasahan natin in the years to come. Again, I'm saying all of these things in the spirit of kumbaga, Carino Brutal to. I love ASEAN. I'm glad that we have something like ASEAN. Otherwise, will be something more like Middle East and other more unstable countries, regions in the world. But, yun nga eh, parang minsan nakakapos ako and I understand yung frustration. But, do you think part of this story also, Admiral, I know you wanna add something, but can I also connect this? Meron bang part din na siguro masyado tayong naive na tingin natin, wala kaming paki dyan sa ASEAN yan, tutulungan naman tayo ng mga ibang bansa na Western and all. Do you think there's also that kind of naive complacency that we can just ignore the rest of ASEAN and ram our way through in coordination with traditional allies?
I hope not. I'm not familiar with how our diplomatic agencies work, no? Pero I hope not, no? Kasi that would be, parang hindi mo ginawa trabaho mo doon eh. Akin lang talagang kailangan push mo eh. Engage natin yung mga kapitbahay natin. Now, you mentioned about Vietnam. No? Now, Trump just recently slapped them with a 20%
it's not helping.
And a 40% tariff. No? So merong galaw si Trump na might change the dynamics of Southeast Asia. Okay? Na nakikinita ko. Trump is using economic warfare against China. And he's trying to isolate China by increasing yung tariffs sa ASEAN states na China is using as conduit to the US market. So, Vietnam yung tinamaan ko eh. If you're being used by China to transship goods from China to US via Vietnam, 40% yung tariff niya. So baka may impact yan, baka mag-change pa yung dynamic yan. Ganyan lang natin. Once umiikot na yung discussion on tariffs.
Yeah,
remember,
right, please.
Ito yung problema kasi kaya yung America is not, kumbaga, is out of the ball game eh. Ang labanan dito economics eh. And China knows that. Okay. Geoeconomics ang labanan sa Southeast Asia. That's why ang naglalaro ang ASEAN with China. Ang US, security-oriented yung approach initially. So, hindi siya part ng conversation.
Yeah.
Yung meron lang yung 3 words na gusto marinig yung ASEAN sa US na hindi kaya ibigay ng US. Free trade agreement. Hindi niya mabigay yun. So, kung ano pa pag-uusapan natin? That was before Trump. So ngayon, pumasok si Trump, purely, ang main line of effort na sa China ay nakikita ko economic warfare. Hindi yun na military side. And consistent yan, nung Trump 1.0, yun din naman ang ginamit niya eh. Hindi naman yung military.
Okay, so how do you see this going down? Because the liberal critic is that Trump is just alienating everyone right and left, no? Allies in Europe, alienating like-minded countries in the region, whereas India, Vietnam, and then there's the kind of a more MAGA or not even MAGA or MAGA adjacent argument, which is, well, I mean, US may not be able to offer new economic deals like China, but it could leverage what it already has, right? I mean, alam natin, Vietnam's biggest export destination is US. China is never going to replace US in terms of export destination because it's just not the kind of consumer markets it is. In fact, Vietnam is the launching pad for a lot of Chinese producers. So, in what sense do you think Trump could actually leverage, if not weaponize, the tariff wars to get Vietnam and a couple of other countries actually on board geopolitically vis-a-vis China? Or is that even possible? I mean, what is your take on that, Admiral, on that debate?
Well, babalik ka sa national interest eh. Vietnam will have to make a choice between maintaining relations with China or yung national interest ng Vietnam. I would presume magpe-prevail yung national interest niya. Eh pag sinabi ni US na siya yung basic main market ng Vietnamese foods.
Right.
I want you to operate or to transact business with us under these conditions. They will have to make a choice between do you still want to be part of the US market or so
Yeah.
Transactional pero predictable. Predictable siya, predictable in the sense na alam mo yung rules of the game eh. Walang feel good, walang hidden agenda rito eh. It's purely transactional.
Right. No, that's a good point because I was thinking, parang Vietnam was free riding basically. No, it was having it both ways, diba? Get all the investment from US, get all the investment from China, re-export Chinese products, enjoy the US market, pretend that you're good with everyone, but basically you're not a reliable partner to either US or, well, from China's point of view, as long as Vietnam doesn't join the US camp, they're fine with that, right? So now the US could say, well, you cannot have all of this juicy export market in the US if you're not gonna play ball, or if you're just gonna continue to slide into China's sphere of influence, right? So in that sense, do you think that potentially this could provide a way to coax and cajole Vietnam, or maybe even, well, India doesn't need it as much because they already are standing up to China in their own ways. But could this be a blueprint to get some of the ASEAN countries to stop being free riders and actually get their act together? Or there could be a backfiring, baka magkaroon ng backlash na there will be even more dissociating from US. Kasi that's also a debate. Diba? Some would say, actually, hindi pa rin, China is not ready to replace US as an export destination. Baka not ever, right? So despite all of these nice talks and all, whether you're Malaysia, whether you're Vietnam, whether you're even Indonesia, never mind Philippines, you cannot ignore the US demand if they're willing to leverage their export markets, among other things.
Well, the entire point ng method to the madness ni Trump, you mentioned about alienating everybody,
Yeah.
is actually to fix yung all the free riders
Problem.
to the US economy.
Yeah.
And that goes that's both ways, sa Europe at sa Asia. So, yun yung tatamaan talaga ng tariff strategy niya. If you're a free riding state, tapos ang detrimental to US interest, yun ang ikaw ngayon ang focus ng kanyang attention. China is the biggest free rider actually to the US. In a way, you can say na China took advantage of the globalization, the globalization of the economy. Siya yung beneficiary and
Sure.
nung trend na yun. And now the US is paying for that. I'm just looking at one area which is my concern, yung naval capabilities. One of the tinamaan ng globalization, I think, is yung shipbuilding capability ng US. Because they have to dismantle that capability and allow other states, this is basically Korea, Japan, and China, to dominate the shipbuilding, yung shipbuilding industry sa mundo. So that is one of the areas na tinamaan, and it impacts on yung readiness ng US Navy. Okay. So that's just one example, just a granular approach to how yung globalization affected yung US in terms of defense.
So, Admiral, we have been discussing this since the return of Trump to the White House. Again, it's always, you can always say it's just too early to say. Pero so far, meron ka bang nakitang indications na US is kind of figuring out an industrial military strategy to revive its fundamentals, and some would argue now it's also the fact that the US still doesn't have a coherent foreign policy, in the sense that well, I mean, not long ago, it was involved in protecting its ally in the Middle East yet again, di ba? Ang daming ginastos sa THAAD missile, and the US was almost involved in a total war with another regional power. On Ukraine, it's not sure. He's in, he's out. One day he's withdrawing, one day he's supporting, blowing cold and hot. And so, do you think na medyo ano pa rin, medyo sabog pa rin, or meron parang, is there coherence emerging, or you think we're in a transitional phase na inevitable na medyo magulo at the beginning, but eventually things are gonna, flatten out in a certain direction?
Ang problema kasi Trump has only a few years sa term niya. And some of the solutions require more years that his administration can provide. For example, I go back to shipbuilding capability. He already identified the problem. I think he directed yung Secretary of the Navy to look into how to improve yung shipbuilding, restore yung shipbuilding capability ng US. Then he created an office in the White House itself, just focusing on shipbuilding.
Right.
So he knows na may problema, and he gave the strategic direction how to look into solving the problem. The question is, does he have enough time to solve the problem? I don't think so. No? Pangalawa, can you reverse yung impact ng globalization? Kasi basically, what America is saying is, we dispense with yung manufacturing natin, we gave it away. We shifted to information-based industry. Tapos, kumbaga, babalik tayo sa manufacturing. Kumbaga, they've gone past it already. One conversation we can start na mutually beneficial to us would be, how can the Philippines use its shipbuilding capabilities?
Yeah.
Restore its own shipbuilding capability and leverage that as a sort of in support of the U.S. requirements. So it cuts both ways. May benefit yan sa atin in terms of economy. At the same time, it can be it will address yung problem natin in terms of jump-starting yung defense industry natin locally.
Right.
Kasi we need to address also yung supply chain natin ng armed forces. Yung supply chain issues natin. We cannot depend on other countries to actually be responsible for yung upgrades.
So that inevitably raises this question, no, Admiral, na I just don't see US alone being in a position to fully address yung gaps, capability gaps. So the other thing that is happening right now is you have people like Elbridge Colby, among others, basically calling in favors, right? Telling Australia, telling Japan, ano ba? Tutulungan niyo ba kami sa Taiwan kung magkakaroon ng gulo, etc. Basically, there is hindi naman admission, but there's basically a presupposition there that there's no way US alone can deal with the China question, right? That inevitably it has to be an integrated approach. So, having said that, how are you feeling about the Trump administration, at least some officials in Trump administration, more aggressively pursuing burden sharing? We just saw the NATO summit the other month kung saan, supposedly Daddy was in town and NATO countries kind of with some accounting, creativity managed to give him some sort of assurance of 5% defense spending on the GDP. I mean, how do you see that working? And more specifically, how do you think the Philippines can work in that integrated deterrence kind of mechanism or strategy without also undermining strategic autonomy? I mean, or does it even make sense for us to talk about strategic autonomy anymore in an era of intensified US-China rivalry and also the kind of direct threats we're facing in our own immediate neighborhood? Gusto ko lang balikan tong mga questions na to because these are really relevant fundamental questions.
Ang tingin ko kasi ito yung broad strokes ng Trump grand strategy. Have Europe and NATO fix its defense spending problem. And dapat NATO takes care of the problems in Europe.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, yung Ukraine-Russian conflict is a NATO problem. Okay. That gives Trump yung exit strategy na hinahanap niya to get out of the European theater of operations, particularly in Ukraine. Sa Middle East naman, basically sinab-contract niya na sa Israel yung problema ng Middle East. But medyo kinapos dito sa Iran, so tinulungan niya. But basically sinab-contract niya. Again, the point is, for Trump, ang thinking niya is how do I exit from the Middle East theater of operations? So if I can exit in Europe and I can exit in the Middle East, I can now focus on Indo-Pacific. Okay. Basahin mo yung Sheldrich Colby, sabi niya, to the NATO countries, huwag na kayo makisawsaw sa Indo-Pacific, just focus on Europe.
Right.
Which is actually a reversal of what we're trying to do, which is
Exactly.
encourage yung European countries to help us using the arbitral ruling as a convening as our convening power. So parang kontra ngayon doon sa ginagawa natin to support our own interests. So kumbaga sinasabi ng Trump administration is you NATO, you fix your problem in Europe, Israel, you help us fix the problem in the Middle East. At the same time, we will do some diplomatic actions to sort of ease out yung to win away yung support ng other Arab countries in the Middle East. Okay. Now, for China naman, ito yung mantra ngayon na nilalabas ni Eldridge Colby o Australia, Japan, we need your help. Okay? Basically sisingilin yan sila in 5%. The same dun sa Europe. Medyo umalma lang yung Japan. Okay? But hindi talaga kaya ng US on its own. So mangyayari sa kanya parang overarching siya. Pero hindi siya nakapronta. Andun lang siya sa likod. Okay. That will be consistent with yung Trump's focus, which is just focus on domestic issues in the US.
Yeah, so basically alliance management, no, which is nothing easy considering there are also peculiarities and divergences within regions. So for instance, in the Middle East, there's also the Turkish take on things. There's also the GCC take on things that definitely is not on the same page as, let's say, Israel's. In Europe, for instance, in Poland, the Poles have a different understanding of how the Europe should move forward, perhaps than, say, some countries in Western Europe, I don't know, Netherlands or even Southern Europe for that matter, right? Probably Portugal or Greece are not necessarily on the same page as Poland and Poland and Hungary also have very different relationship with Russia, for instance, even though both are Eastern European frontline states. So, again, grand strategy is good, but it's the devil is in the details, no? Admiral, now going back to the Philippines, how do you think we're playing our cards so far in terms of navigating these tectonic shifts and making sure we make the most out of our alliances, but at the same time not losing room for maneuver? Or is it too late to talk about room for maneuver? I mean, how do you see the Philippine room for maneuver as the U.S. pulls the strings and says, andito na ba kayo or hindi? And as you correctly pointed out, if the stance is Europe, just deal with your own mess, don't try to play cute here. So where does that leave us in terms of our own diversification and multi-alignment strategy, particularly in terms of reaching out to Europe on the defense and geopolitical front?
Ang akin kasi, I advocate, a strong advocate of yung dapat may plan B tayo. Plan B to mitigate against a situation na the US will not be very helpful to our national interest. Makakakontra pa sa national interest natin. So we need to create our own lapis work of unilaterals that conforms to our own interest. Okay? So that's why we need to look at maybe, you mentioned Japan and Australia, but I'm looking at ano ba yung potential for a Philippine, Japan, Australia type of engagement. Okay. There's another one, napag-usapan namin dito sa araw. What we're looking at, a Vietnam, Philippine, India type of another multilateral. So we build on what are yung existing arrangements that can work for us. Or maybe the one that is the elephant in the room is actually a Japan, Taiwan, Philippine
triangle.
Kasi kailangan natin yun whether we like it or not. Japan is part of our security. Taiwan is one of our vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't want to be involved in any conflict na apektado in Taiwan. But I think we need to factor in that the potential na ma-drone in tayo. Considering the fact na marami tayong migrant workers dun sa Taiwan.
Right.
Hindi natin maiwasan yung problema. So we're just being realistic.
Speaking of being realistic, Admiral, how do you see the direction of our direct engagement with Taiwan, because it seems like we're steadily hindi naman formal bilateral relations in a full sense of the word, but it looks like contacts are being met at the very high level, or at least higher than ever. Isn't that too risky, or is that also naturally part of the whole entwinement of our national security strategies?
We need to push engagement with Taiwan. Whatever we can get away with,
Yeah.
diplomatically.
That's
We try to push the
so
envelope. kumbaga.
coupon pushing the boundary, yeah, envelope, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Kasi, we are a chain yung Japan, Taiwan, Philippines That's the chain that needs to be strong. So the weakest link, you can say the weakest link is the Philippines, but I would say that the weakest link is Taiwan kasi siya yung nasa gitna. Okay. And nasa kanya yung focus ng China. So I would say that Taiwan is the weakest link in the chain. So we need to actually collaborate in one form or another, be it formal or informal, be it overt or covert. But we do need to engage Taiwan.
And lastly, Admiral, just to be a little bit more operational and logistics on this, what are we learning from the latest conflicts? Because it looks like there are divergently, I mean, some would say radically different lessons being drawn. I mean, on one hand, some would say recent conflicts show that missile defense system is the way forward. Some would say not necessarily. Maybe if you're at the level of country X or country Y. At the same time, we saw in one of the latest in the so-called 12-day war, right? That indeed, it looks like there were hypersonic missiles used, and they did pierce into what some would say the most advanced defense system in the world, which, by the way, was also augmented by U.S. THAAD missile systems. It looks like the French, the Germans, everyone was involved. What are the logistical lessons we're learning, and how should that play into our own, I would say, aspiration to have more, I don't know, Typhoon missile here, HIMARS here, and MESSIS here? I mean, logistic wise, what are lessons we're learning so far, and also from the drone war that is taking a much more interesting turn in the Ukraine conflict, Admiral?
I think bago natin approaching yung logistics issues, we need to agree on yung strategy.
Okay.
And that was the point of my yung presentation ko yung last Friday is
Right.
We cannot just modernize the armed forces without understanding ano ba yung strategy behind the modernization.
Right.
Kasi otherwise, baka may mga gaps dyan na hindi natin nakita kasi naka-wishlist driven tayo in terms of arms. Sure. Okay. Now, of course, there's the NMS, the National Military Strategy, but that's an administrative document to me.
Yeah.
We need to look at yung ano ba yung warfighting strategy
Right, exactly.
in the first place. I think there is an agreement that there is an agreement, tacit agreement that we have adopted an strategy. But this needs to be put up front na ito nga yun. Kasi there needs to be a conversation about how that will work out when you actually do the logistics part. Okay?
Right.
Now, one of the lessons doon sa natin, both sa Ukraine sa Middle East, is you don't have to fight face to face Yung missiles nga yung
Yeah.
Ang pinaka masasaktan ka. So we need to look at developing that capability. Or at least looking at how do we
You mean strike capability? Strike capability.
We don't necessarily need to own it. You gave the example of Typhoon missile system. The reason I think that it is the correct system is palagi na nagreklamo yung Beijing about that system.
Right.
So, ang akin kasi ang personal rule of thumb ko is pag nirereklamo ka lang mo on certain things, that means you're doing it right.
Yeah, you're on the right path if you're pissing them off.
Having that capability, whether the US owns it, we need that capability for we need it to break yung escalation dominance ng China sa atin. Right now kasi they can up the tempo, they can lower the tempo. Sila may control ng We're just responding to yung yung stimuli. We need to break that cycle. And I think the Typhoon missile system or similar systems, whether the US owns it or the Philippines owns it, is one such example of yung things, capabilities that breaks Chinese escalation dominance. So, we also need to look at yung drones. Kasi, when we planned for the capability ng Navy yung around 10 years ago, hindi pa ganun kadami yung Chinese Coast Guard at militia.
Right.
So now they're there. Okay. Now, hindi mo lang pwede gamitin yung BrahMos doon kasi that's a very expensive system. Tapos kagamitin mo lang sa militia vessel. Kumbaga sa negosyo, talo ka sa buhay. You bought an expensive system and you're using it for a cheap system. Okay. So I think the way to go there is how do we develop an organic drone capability na dito gawa sa Pilipinas that kumbaga we can produce on our own in mass numbers.
Right.
Okay. Kasi that would be a battle of attrition yung capability. Remember yung militia vessels, the way I look at yung design ng militia vessels ng China, they fall under the category of what we call craft of opportunity for mine warfare. Okay. So they can easily load naval mines, go to let's say Mindoro Strait and lay yung mines na yon. That would have closed off the strait for our use. Okay. So ganun yun, ganun yung potential niya for other activities.
All right, so you don't have to send the drones all across, the Taiwan Straits and the first island chain. If you can just have a cross strait, Bashi Channel or something like that, that should be good enough.
So yeah, yun lang.
That's a very good point in terms of parang immediate proximity interventions, medium range perhaps drone operations. Should we also develop yung mga tinatawag na yung mga kamikaze drones? Is that also an economic way forward for the Philippines?
Yes, kasi we need to find a way to fight war conflicts in a cheaper way.
Right.
Okay? Maganda yung for picture taking, maganda yung mga expensive systems na binibili natin. It's good for the morale. But remember, pag bumili ka ng barrel, ng isang, let's say, M16, 30 rounds lang yan
Yeah.
Okay? 30 rounds lang yung bala niya. So, you need to factor in yung saan magagaling yung ibang bala mo. So, you need to look at systems that are sustainable. Okay? And to be sustainable, that means it has to be cheap.
Right. So, what about development of hypersonic missiles? Like, for instance, the Iranians were able to do that under very difficult circumstances with sanctions and isolation and all of that. Do you think we should also do that to the Chinese, for instance? When faced with the technologically superior?
Medyo expensive na yan So, baka yun yung pwede natin negotiate sa US na, okay, dito niya lalagay yan. Okay. If pumayag, then ang next na pag-uusapan is yung how do we control it, yung joint command of the system.
Right.
Okay. The third would be yung ROE naman, rules of engagement. When do we use it? When not to use it? Kasi that means you need to agree on the ROE. So ganun, pero detalye na yun.
Well, and those details matter. Last part, Admiral, I was about to say bongbong missile ang gagamitin na. Hypersonic bongbong missile. But speaking of bongbong, Marcos, so Sona is coming up very soon, Admiral. What should be you think, line of President Marcos Jr. In his latest Sona in terms of creating the conditions, the psychological conditions, and also creating the policy conditions or even legislative conditions to get us going and institutionalize the good reforms we're doing when it comes to national security strategy and also the West Philippine Sea front? Anong sa tingin niyo mahalagan? What should he do also in his basically legacy years, his final years in office to basically Duterte proof, right? His West Philippine Sea strategy.
Sa akin lang when we create laws, we need to factor in how do we enforce those laws. Okay? I take two examples. Yung lumabas bago, yung maritime zones law at archipelagic sea lanes. Pagkalabas natin noon, suddenly there's a spike of Chinese Coast Guard vessels probing yung ating territorial waters sa Zambales area.
Right.
Okay. That means ang dating sa akin nun is siguro inisip ng China, okay, tingnan natin kung anong ambag niyang maritime zones law mo kung pag tinest ko yan. Okay? Same as arbitral ruling yan eh. We have the arbitral ruling. Tama naman, walang enforcement component yun eh. But here, we naglabas tayo ng dalawang batas. That should be the legal basis now to modernize yung security services natin that are involved in maritime security. So, yung archipelagic sea lanes law natin, we have 7 archipelagic straits. We need to secure all of them kasi yun yung maneuver space eh. Hindi naman tayo makikipag-away sa West Philippine Sea kasi militarily is not defensible.
Yeah.
Okay. So the logical next step would be to withdraw to the archipelagic states. Yun yung natin, hold the line. Yun yung hold the line positions natin eh, yung 7 archipelagic states. Dapat doon tayo yung dominant doon. That means we need to be able to assert sea control, uncontested sea control over those archipelagic straits. That means you need to invest on those. Okay, hindi lang yan for maritime commercial traffic. We need to defend the areas that we pass laws on. Demarcating them as important. So parang yan eh, you create the LLEX or SLEX, di ba? You also invest on yung may nagpapatrol dyan. Then you also invest in the toll gate to control traffic.
Right.
Okay. Otherwise, through and through yan. Okay. So we need to create
The whole thing,
yung
the whole
toll
package.
gate to control the traffic and the patrol system to make sure that secure yung highway mo.
And Admiral, what should be the narrative or rhetoric of the president? Should he be in this kind of dapat ba may sense of urgency siya in terms of unifying the country, putting the country, siguro burn bridges na with the DDS and all, but what about the majority of the country? How can he rally them behind a certain national cause?
Actually, hindi na siya dapat parang rallying cry eh. What we need is a roadmap eh. Remember,
Roadmap,
he has only 3 years.
Yeah.
He has only 3 years remaining. So, dapat by 2028, yung short runway na yon o short road na naiiwan sa kanya, mayroon ka ng tangibles na makikita doon, na doable within those 3 years. So, isa rallying cry, yes, but dapat may metrics to actually put some sense into yung rallying cry na yun.
So operationalize na dapat, no? So we should have matured into that phase all together. Thank you so much, Admiral, for that fantastic overview. I'm sure we can have more technical and detailed discussion. Maraming salamat, Admiral. Are there things that you think our audience should read in terms of your publications, yung some of the things you perhaps want people to read more para mas ma-appreciate nila yung interventions niyo, Admiral, in terms of yung you seem to have some idea at least in terms of the blueprint forward.
I have yet to write that, so siguro one of the days pag naisulat ko na.
But the Theory of Victory, right? You at least touched on that. You wanna
Victory, there are 2 papers. First one, actually I mentioned that during in the forum last Friday.
Right.
The first Theory of Victory paper was based on yung discussions last year. Okay, and was published by the Ateneo Policy Center. It's in their website one. The second one I wrote was focused just on the military side. Was published by StratPage around May of this year. Okay. So dito, I push forward the imperative that we need a strategy not only for the military side, but it should also cover yung counter-propaganda natin, yung economic resiliency efforts natin, as well as yung diplomatic track. Okay? So the strategy is not purely for the military lang, hindi yung CADC lang for the armed forces, but a CADC that covers diplomacy, communications, the military, at saka the economic component.
Thank you very much, Admiral, on that. Hope to catch up with you again in person soon. Maraming salamat, Admiral, and have a good evening. Talk to you soon po.
Evening.
Salamat po. Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much everyone guys for listening to us dito sa latest episode natin ng FY Deep Dive. Balikan namin kayo. Mukhang meron akong problema sa folder dito. I have to do something about this. I'll catch up with you guys soon. God bless. And tomorrow naman hopefully we'll continue discussion including dito sa BAM and Kiko issue. But more importantly, what should be the way forward in the 20th Congress for the progressive candidates. And then we're going to have the rest of the week, God willing, catching up with Justice Carpio and other luminaries and experts on other important issues. On that note, thank you very much. Maraming salamat. God bless and talk to you soon.